Okay, guys, we are doing Margaret's story. Here we go. I had a fairly normal life. I had nice parents who loved me. My uncle lived with us, and my grandmother was around a lot. I had good friends. It was a normal Catholic high school girl's life. When I came home from school, I would take care of my 4 younger brothers and sisters and cook their dinner. I had been going with my boyfriend for a little over 2 years, and he would come over rather frequently. He had ideas of what we should do in that time period. I wasn't always thrilled as he was, but I always said 5 minutes of bad sex changed my life. I don't remember my father finding out. I do remember him coming upstairs. Now, my father was very Catholic. My mother was not Catholic. He didn't use birth control. We went to church if there was a blizzard or if there was snow up to our waist. We went to church. And he said, it is too late for us to do something about this. He asked, is it too late for us to do anything about this? I was just shocked and horrified that my father, this Catholic, was willing to bend the rules. And I said, this is not something I'm willing to do. So the next thing I knew, my father came to me and said, you will be going to St. Anne's Infant and Maternity Home. And you will be giving your baby up for adoption. There's no room for discussion. I wasn't in any position to argue with them about what I was going to do and not do. Many other birth moms will talk about their maternity home as this evil place, but really and truly, St. Anne's was a place where I was given a home, a shelter. I had freedom. There were lots of other girls like me. We would go out. We just had to let people know where we were going. We would sign out and sign back in. We went to the movies, we went shopping. The only thing they wanted you to do was to get up and go to Mass. But I was asking God to help me, so I didn't mind getting up at 5:30 to go to Mass. Ugh, that sounds awful. I used to get up super early between, having a baby. I used to get up early for him, obviously. But when I worked on the farm and we had to do early morning feedings and check-ins for the baby goats and all that, getting up early was not fun, but I did it. It just wasn't that fun. I used to get up at like 3:30 in the morning to check on the if the baby goats were born. Unrelated, but point is, I used to get up really early to deal with that. And that was back in my younger days. So it was probably around her age. Anyway, one morning, I woke at 2 o'clock with this horrible stomach ache. I went to the bathroom, kind of drowsy, and all of a sudden it dawned on me. This wasn't a stomach ache. I was in labor. The nun came and she put my girlfriend and me in a station wagon. We went tearing through the streets in the middle of the night. Nobody called my parents. We got to the emergency room and they examined me. And they said, the head's down. You're 4 centimeters dilated, so we're going to admit you. And the nun said, okay, we are leaving now. I turned around and thought, what do you mean you're leaving and taking my girlfriend with you? But they did. They left. Oh my God. So we continuously hear that these young girls are left completely alone to labor. It's bad enough seeing stories with the husbands being there and not knowing what's happening and they're fainting and all this stuff. And these are more recent stories, right? So in the last 10 to 20 years or sooner. But what? I'm sorry, I'm just not laughing out of, because it's funny. I'm laughing because it's so dark. This is so horrid. I remember laboring and I had my mom, my adoptive mom there, for most of it. And my adoptive father, my dad, came in and, they were extremely scared and, they were there. That's not to say I didn't still feel kind of alone in that manner. When you're going through this, you feel super alone because nobody else is in pain. They're not, they're not describing what's happening, even though you kind of know what's happening, you kind of don't. But these young women had no idea what was going to happen. And then they're left alone, not even a nurse. All right, anyway. In those days, being prepped to have a baby, especially for a girl who was 17 years old, was humiliating. There was an enema and the shaving. They weren't very compassionate to St. Anne's girls, I don't think. And you just labored by yourself. The last thing I remembered was the mask coming down on my face. I woke up and I said, "Where's my baby?" And I started feeling for my stomach. I started screaming that they'd taken my baby, and screaming, trying to climb out over the railing, fighting. They said, "No, no, no, no. If you promise to stay here, within 5 minutes, you'll have your baby to you." And they brought him to me in a gray warmie box. And I could remember falling asleep with my hand around the gray box. When I saw him, I felt absolutely in love. I can remember what he felt like. He looked like what he smelled like. I wasn't supposed to see him at all. They said, "You shouldn't see him because you're going to forget and have other children." Oh my God, every time they say this, I swear they don't say this to grieving mothers who lost their baby due to, death, or say kidnapping, something, of that manner. But they say this to birth mothers, right? This is so gross. And they still, I'm not saying they still say this today, but they definitely still have this mentality of, "Oh, you'll move on, you'll be fine." And then birth mothers absolutely get dogged on by, society, by people that just don't have any empathy for what they've gone through. And I'm not going to say that adoptees can't be absolutely horrid too. They absolutely can be, if they're still in the fog. I've never once said to a birth mom that, even if I didn't like them because they were in the fog, I'm just going to say that. I never once said that they deserved it, right? Because I know that they're going through trauma and they're just not recognizing it. And there's just a pain. And even the ones, I do want to have a longer video. It'll probably be June or July, where, we talk about those open adoptions that we see online. I have mixed feelings. There's one YouTuber where she has an open adoption with the birth mom. They're good friends, supposedly. At least that's what they convey online, right? And the story is much more complex. But all I can think of is, at any point, that can shut down, and that bio mom can no longer see that baby. Now, the kid is 3, so we're in the 9%, 10% that, past age 1. Okay, so it's still open, but it's still complicated, right? And, I just imagine what this little boy is going to feel like when he's able to express himself more openly, that his bio mom was around and had other kids but didn't raise him. Anyway, my point is that even with open adoptions, even with closed adoptions, whether it was back in the 1940s, 1920s, nowadays, so forth, you don't forget that child, and it's just something really horrible to say to a mother, let alone, especially a birth mother, There's no empathy towards birth moms, really. Anyway, we're going to continue. Where were we? They said, "Write down on this side of the paper what you can give your baby. Write down on the other side what the adoptive parents have to offer." So you had to write that down. I said, "I don't know." And they said, "Well, just picture what he's going to look like, He'll not have the nice clothes that the other children are going to have. And on the playground, they'll call him a bastard." And I believe that. I remember writing down they had money. They had a father. They had a house. They had clothes and food. And on my side, I only put down love. That's all I have. All right, so stopping there, we often hear that, and yes, 95% of birth moms just needed more support and resources. Absolutely. But on the adoptive parent side, we often hear, well, they can give the baby everything and like love will be enough. But love isn't enough when it comes to adoptive parents. There's no genetic mirroring. There's no culture. There's no, there's a lot that's missing that, you can have a great childhood as an adoptee. Absolutely. It's rare, but it can absolutely happen. Your adoptive parents can do everything that we recommend. That doesn't negate the losses that we also feel. And those losses are quite powerful, and it's trauma. Trauma rewires the brain. But, they always say, well, adoptive parents are, better off. Not necessarily. A lot of adoptive parents are middle to upper class. That is true. However, they're trying to raise money to adopt because adoption ranges anywhere from $30,000 to $150,000. $150,000 being on the upper side and $30,000 being on the lower end. But still, that's just for one adoption. That doesn't include actually raising the child. So, we're all for, not we, but society is all for helping these couples who are usually infertile for raising money to adopt for the legal process, aka buying of children, separation, instead of actually giving the biological family support. We so much demonize biological families, but yet praise adoptive parents like they're saviors, and it's completely the opposite that we should be doing. Just saying. Anyway, moving on. What's shocking to me is sitting with the other birth mothers and hearing them tell the same story. I thought, oh my God, there must have been a textbook. You looked up how to get babies away from the mother, and this is how to do it. There must have been, because we were all told the same thing. Even the story about the playground. I heard it from other people, and I'm thinking, oh my God, it was a script. It affected me so much, and here it was just a script. So while I'm in the hospital, I'm saying to God, please let me keep this baby. And I can remember it was Saturday. My parents coming to the doorway, and I said, have you seen him? Isn't he beautiful? My mom said, you can't see him. You're not allowed. And there was a nurse standing on the other side of me at the head of the bed, and I can remember her saying, she can see him whenever she wants. She's that baby's mother. Hey, I call out on that nurse. Hey, good for you. We need more of you, okay? Babies need their mamas, okay? They need their mommies. They also need their dads, absolutely, but they really need their moms because they spend 9 months growing and developing and only understanding the mother for the most part. The mother's voice, the mother's heartbeat, the mother's emotions, all this stuff, it's a bonding experience, even though, you may not feel like that as the pregnant person or woman, whichever you prefer to be called. But that baby seeks the biological mother, the mother, the gestational mother. So, I understand their surrogacy and all that may not be biological, but they were the gestational carriers. They seek that, and taking that away creates trauma, and that's what people aren't understanding. All right, continuing on. That nurse didn't give me enough self-confidence to keep my child, but those 2 sentences gave me the foundation on which to rebuild my sense of self. She probably didn't remember me after that shift, but she became one of the most important women in my life, just by her compassion and 2 sentences, When I returned to the maternity home, they said, you've only gone from school 5 weeks, so you can go back to your school and say you had appendicitis. Or if you're uncomfortable, you may continue to come to school at St. Anne's, but your son will be here in the nursery, and you have to agree not to see him. What the frick? Sorry. And I said, I'll agree to that. I'd like to continue at St. Anne's. I was too embarrassed to go back, which wasn't quite true, so I got to spend 6 weeks with him. Because I was being individually tutored, my school hours were 9 to 1, so I got there at 7, and I'd see him until 9. Then I'd see him after, so I'm guessing she snuck in. Then I'd see him after school from 1 to 5. I went to Mass every morning. I never truly believed my mother or grandmother or God would let him go away from me. On Saturdays, I never saw him, but Sundays, from 2 to 4, they put all the babies by the window. And the potential adoptive parents could go and look at the different babies. And I would go look at my own child. That's how she did it. I figured there was some way that she would sneak in to see him. Somewhere in there, I had to go sign the papers. I walked to Catholic Charities, and they put the papers in front of me, and I said, "Can I have some more time with him? And I'm trying to find a way." They said, "You can't have any more time. He's costing your family $6 a day in the nursery," which sounds like a little bit of money today, but then it was a lot of money. And they said, "Haven't you caused enough trouble? If you sign the papers, the bills will be done." So I had to sign because I had already caused enough trouble. I signed the papers, and they never told me I had 30 days to change my mind. See, this is what's the problem, is they never tell these women, even in today's world, how much time, or the fact that they can change their mind. Thursday was Holy Thursday, and when I came back Monday, he was gone. I finished school, and that was the end of it for a few years. My parents wanted me to come back and just be a little girl again, like it had never happened. I dated a couple of boys in between, and then met the man who's now my husband, and ended up getting pregnant again. I know I was trying to replace my baby. When I had my first child with my husband, she was a girl. I was thrilled because I didn't want another boy at the time. I ended up having another baby a year later. Then we used some birth control for a couple of years. Then I had a son and then 2 more daughters. And it never dawned on me why I was having these children. So having them, many of them, so quickly. So my husband and I had 5 children, and somewhere along there I said, forget it. Having these kids isn't filling up this hole. I thought about him every day. He was just mine, part of me that I didn't share with anyone else. The part of me that was his mother remained 17, and the rest of me continued to grow, to be a wife and a mother, eventually a nursing student. I was in therapy for a little bit of depression, and they said, "You have an overactive maternal instinct. You need to become a nurse." What? So that's what I did. I never mentioned in this depression and everything that I'd given up a baby for adoption. Never mentioned it. I went on with my life. In 1976, I saw a little ad for Concerned United Birth Parents. I cut it out and I carried it in my wallet. We didn't have the whatever it was, $30 it cost to join, but for $5 you could join a registry. So I joined the registry. Every birthday, my mother gave me $20, and my grandmother gave me $20, and I combined it for my ALMA, Adoptees Liberty Movement Association, membership. So I'd get the newspaper with all the stories of reunion in it. And that went on for quite a few years. And just using the birthday money for that. My husband knew, and every birthday I'd get very quiet. Every March 6th, very quiet. He was very nice to me on that day, no matter what else was going on in our life. If he was ticked off about something else, he was nice on March 6th. On my son's 12th birthday, I drove home from work crying the whole way because I knew I just couldn't deal with it anymore. I sent in money for my Cub membership, and a woman called us right away and said, "Hi, I'm from Concerned United Birth Parents." And I sat down and cried. I couldn't stop crying because I was talking to somebody who understood my 17-year-old self. She knew. She knew what my life was like. I knew her well now, and she's very different from me, but I will never forget her because she was there during that time period. Finally, I went and asked Catholic Charities to help me find him. They sent me to their lawyer. He told me, "You're the first person that's ever done this. I don't understand what you want." Wow, she was the first person? maybe from that Catholic Charities, but most birth parents seek or want to do reunion. It was a lot easier back then than it was earlier. And again, it's gotten slightly easier as time has gone by, but it's still complicated. Again, something that I want to talk about is the search and reunion process. I know everyone's story is different, but even having that information, which you're lucky if you can have that information or have access to it right away, can still make your search complex. So the less information you have, the more complicated it is. Anyway, continuing on. I said, I want to have contact with my son. And he said, well, we have to protect the baby. I said, what baby? There isn't a baby. He's 25 now. He kept insisting there was this baby and they had to protect this baby. And I said, he's older now than I was when you took him from me. All right, stopping here. They really infantize us, right? Like, oh, the adoptee's a baby. They always forget that we grow up, right? But they're always like, we got to protect you, blah, blah, blah. And then, like, when we, as adoptees, are speaking out on, like, we need this information for whatever reason, usually it's medical, or for our culture and stuff, they're like, well, we have to protect the birth parent. They deserve to be privatized. Like, no, they don't. They really don't. If they don't want to talk to us, that's, their choice, but we need that information because it is life-saving, right? But, God, it's so frustrating to be infantized as an adoptee. Anyway, they had me fill out this form, this legal-size paper with questions to prove I was fit to know him before they would search for him. Then they said they would look for him and they would contact his adoptive parents and ask their permission to see if I could contact him. And I said, he's an adult. He's not a baby. There is no baby. Well, I was getting more and more frustrated, and they were going to charge me $1,500. A professional searcher was going to cost me $200. We're talking about a time when my husband and I didn't have much money. But I just didn't give them the power. They were making me feel like I did back then. The Catholic Charities social worker was incredibly nasty, telling me, you didn't even want to see him then. Why do you want to contact him now? I said, obviously, you don't know what happened. I decided to go with the searcher. My mother gave me $1,000. Today, I realized she was really struggling financially at the time and couldn't afford it, and I borrowed $1,000 from the hospital. I gave my information to a contact person for the searcher. The next day, I was walking down the hallway in labor and delivery, and they called me to the phone. I was the childbirth educator, so I had been answering the phone multiple times, and I can remember thinking, I'm on my way to lunch. I'll call them back after lunch. But I thought, no, just get it done. So I said hello, and the searcher said, his name is blank, and I fell apart. I had gone back to work at the hospital in labor and delivery as a ward clerk. I had to be where my son was, and later I worked as a nurse in labor and delivery and as the assistant head nurse there. After they tore the hospital down and changed it, I no longer wanted to be there because I couldn't go to the room where he was born. I had to be with people giving birth. After finding my son, that has kind of diminished. I left OB 5 years ago to become a case manager, and now I'm director of case management. And it's funny because I often feel I'm an imposter. I've got this position and I'm thinking one day they're going to find out I don't really belong here. It's really funny to be like that, so there's still something inside that makes me feel I'm not good enough, but it's changing slowly. All right. Those social workers kept telling me I wasn't good enough to parent my son. It made me feel I wasn't good enough to parent anybody. I've held my children way too tight, and that's why they've struggled as teenagers. My daughter is going to be 35, and she lives on my street. They've all had trouble separating. I cannot let anybody go. I mean, I'm still sending Christmas cards to people I've met on the street or something. I cannot lose anybody. Self-confidence is an issue. self-esteem, I should say, rather than confidence. And I think the reason I'm heavy is because I have portrayed as a loose girl. So I'm always making sure that no man will want me. For me, it's always been, God didn't let me keep my baby. God took my son because he didn't stop it. When I found my son, I very much wanted him to be my baby again. And I went through a very difficult emotional period of trying to go back and get part of me that was 17 and incorporate it into my 42-year-old self, now 44, to make that part of me old. We make decisions for people that we really shouldn't make because we feel they're not living as we think they should live. Social workers made the decision that I wasn't good enough to parent my son because I wouldn't have been parenting up to their standards. Maybe I wouldn't, but I could have done it. I could have parented my son. I was parenting within 2 years anyway, and I did a decent job of it. To look at the surrender papers now is shocking. It's just like you're handing over your car or something, To see your own signature 30 years later is just very, very painful. I loved him, and I would have sacrificed some of the things that I wanted in order to be his mother. They had no right to make that decision for me and for him. They robbed us of 25 years together. My mom became ill the last years of her life, but Mom didn't want to go to the nursing home. She was completely bedridden and lived alone until she died. And the way she did it was she lived on my street, and my brother lives on my street. And I have another brother and another sister, and we all took turns taking care of her. It was a sacrifice for all of us, but we did it because we're family, and that's what families do. Well, we were a family then too, and they shouldn't have done it. They owed it to me because I was a member of their family. Not because I was good, bad, or whatever, but because I belonged to them. So, another thing that I want to do, speaking of family, is talk about the family dynamics in media and social media. I'm going to be writing a book on this. So I'm gathering information and stuff. And I'll be doing shorter videos on that. But, when she said, we're family, it just brought me to Lilo and Stitch. Ohana means family, and family means we never leave anyone behind. And honestly, Lilo and Stitch is a great example of kinship, right? The sister, Nani, even though she was young, I think she was like between 17 or 19, who took in her, I think Lilo was 6, took in her sister and did everything possible to keep her, to make sure she was okay. Was it perfect? By no means, right? Raising a child is hard enough being an adult, in your 20s and your 30s and your 40s and your 50s. But adding in that dynamic, adding in that grief, their parents died. I think it was like a car accident or something. Anyway, but it was just a great example of sacrifices for family that while relations will change, you're there for your family, Anyway, I will see you guys Monday for Leslie's story before we get started on chapter 8.